Hey guys, I just wanted to go over the nitrogen cycle guided notes. So in the last class we talked about the carbon cycle, all right? And the carbon cycle is just a process by which carbon atoms can make their way from the air, mainly in the form of carbon dioxide, into ground-based forms, whether they be carbon in the form of plants and animals. It could even be carbon that's is in the form of coal or oil, which is buried underground. And those carbon atoms can go from the air to the ground, but they can also go from the ground back to the air. All right. So nitrogen atoms can do the same type of thing. All right. There's a form of nitrogen that exists in the atmosphere, but there's also forms of nitrogen that exist essentially on the Earth's surface. All right. So this part right here, atmosphere, just is another word for that is air. All right, so the thing is that the nitrogen that makes up the Earth's air, nitrogen makes up most of the Earth's air, but the type of nitrogen that exists in the atmosphere exists as what's called N2. All right, N2, that's a chemical formula, and it's shown right here. It's a capital N with a 2 written kind of down and to the right of it. All right. And what that is a molecule where two nitrogen atoms are bound to each other. All right. The problem is that both plants and animals need nitrogen to make proteins and DNA, but the type of nitrogen that's in the air, which is N2, that's going to go right here, is not a usable form for doing that. All right. A good analogy is saying that we need water for living. All right. We need to drink water in order for us to live. But if you were stranded in the middle of the ocean, you would be surrounded by salt water. So you have water all around you, but it's not in a form that you could use to drink. All right. So we're surrounded by nitrogen. It's the number one thing in the air that surrounds us, but it's not in a form that we can use to support life. All right. So how do we get around that? All right. So what plants and animals need another process to essentially split this in the air into chemicals that we can use to make proteins and DNA. All right. So this process of turning the unusable nitrogen in the air into usable nitrogen is called nitrogen fixation. All right, and fixation is Fixation. All right. So there's two. So essentially, whenever you fix nitrogen, that's a way of saying you're taking the N2 in the air and you're turning it into a chemical that's got nitrogen that we can use. All right. So there's two major ways that N2 is fixed. All right. And both of these are going to occur in the soil. All right. So a major way that this is done is through nitrogen fixing bacteria in legume. All right, which is a type of plants. Sorry, a type of plant which we typically refer to as bean plants. All right. The bacteria that exist in their root nodules. All right, nodules. You can see the word right here. So what's a nodule? All right. So right here I've got a little picture of some roots, and you can see these little essentially sacs that are growing off of the roots. All right. These are called nodules. All right. And what a nodule is a sac that contains nitrogen fixing bacteria. All right. So if you want to write that in the margin, let me see if I can find it for you. Okay, so I can basically show you that nodules, those are the sacs containing nitrogen fixing bacteria, and the nodules are located growing on the roots of those bean plants. All right. Okay. And so what those bacteria can do is they can take those nitrogen molecules from the air and they can convert them into what are called amino acids. All right, that's AMINO. And then the next word is acids, ACIDS. All right, and those are used for making proteins. All right, but they can also make what are called nucleotides. That's going to be, and I can show you that right. There it is, nucleotides. NuCleotides. All right, and those are used for making DNA, which is what makes you look like what you look like. All right, so this diagram right here shows that in this part right here. So we've got nitrogen from the air that gets into the soil, and this shows one of these bean plants, and you can see these little bumps coming off of the bean plants. And there are these bacteria in those nodules, and they convert the nitrogen into things like protein. All right. So, what does that do for us? Well, if you're an animal, and we're an animal, if you want to think about it that way, you can eat that plant, and if you eat that plant containing the proteins, then you now have a source of that protein. All right. So there's a way for the nitrogen to go from its unusable form into a usable form for us. All right. Another way that nitrogen is fixed is by a different type of bacteria that just exists freely in the soil. So nitrogen fixing bacteria in soil that fix into ammonium. All right. And the chemical formula for ammonium is shown right here. It's NH4 with a little plus sign. All right. Through a process called ammonification. All right, and ammonification is written right here. All right, ammonia can be further converted by other bacteria into nitrites. All right, nitrites are NO2 with a minus sign, and nitrates. All right, and nitrates are NO3 with a minus sign, and that's done with what are called nitrifying bacteria. All right. So these nitrates here can be used by plants. All right, so that's a way to eventually go from nitrogen in the air to a different form of nitrogen which a plant can use. All right, and again, once it gets into a plant, we can eat that plant, we can use that nitrogen. So again, for something to be a cycle, there has to be a way for it eventually to get back to where it started from. All right. So if the nitrogen can go from the air into plants and animals, there needs to be a way for it eventually to get from plants and animals back to being in the air. All right. So animals return nitrogen to the soil through waste. All right. And I don't want to be too gross about this, but the two forms of that are feces, which is essentially poop. All right. Feces is spelled Feces. All right. And urine. And hopefully you know what urine is. All right. Another way that animals can return it to the soil is simply by dying. All right, when an animal dies, it's going to decompose, and the nitrogen that's in its body is going to get returned to the soil. All right, plants are going to return nitrogen to the soil by either dying, or if a plant were to drop its leaves, the leaves are going to decompose, and the nitrogen in the leaves is going to go back to the soil. So once in the soil, the nitrogen compounds are converted into ammonium, and you can see that in this part of the slide right here. Essentially the plants and animals, the nitrogen can get converted by a certain type of bacteria back into ammonium here. That can get turned into nitrites, all right, eventually into nitrates, all right, and you've seen this point in the cycle before. Nitrates can either be reused by a plant, but there's also this type of bacteria called a denitrifying bacteria, which can convert nitrates back into N2, it's just the nitrogen that's in the air. And therefore, it completes the cycle, because that's a way that the nitrogen can get back from the ground back into the air. All right? So just to make sure that you've got these, this right here would be denitrifying bacteria, all right, and this right here would be atmospheric N2, all right.